and self-advocacy with Sarah Salvaci Hernandez. I'm going to do a very quick introduction, and then I'm going to hand you over to the expert, the autistic OT herself. So for those of you who are new to GAP or not aware of us, our charity is Galway Autism Partnership. The charity was founded in 2012 by autistic adults and by parents of autistic children and young people in order to create a support network for autistic people and their families living in Galway City and County and the west of Ireland. And I'm really delighted, in my memory anyway, Sarah, this is our first time that we've had an international speaker. So we feel really, really fortunate and really privileged to have you with us here this evening. I'm going to give you a quick introduction, and then I'm going to allow you to take over, and we're all really looking forward to what you have to tell us this evening. So our speaker this evening is Sarah Salvaci Hernandez. She's an autistic author, educator, occupational therapist, and an international speaker. So as I said, we feel really privileged to have her joining us this evening. A small charity like GAP in the west of Ireland, we really feel blessed to have you with us. She was also the first openly autistic person elected to serve in a government position in the United States, so making history there. Sarah is passionate about occupational science, sensory processing, and mental wellness and autistic identity. And her vision remains centered on the creation of identity-affirming context to support neurodivergent development. And on top of all that, she also runs a very popular social media site, the Autistic OT, where there's some amazing discourse, and the autistic community is very, very active and always discussing new and interesting topics there. And this is your talk this evening, Sarah, is the second in a kind of an informal webinar series that we've had. Last month, we were lucky to have Davida Hartman of Adult Autism and Tara O'Donnell-Killen of Thriving Autistic join us, and they're two Irish-based autism and neurodivergent affirmative groups based in Ireland. So as I said, we feel really, really happy to have you here speaking with us today. And without further ado, I will hand it over to you and look forward to hearing what you have to say. Great, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Aisling. And I am absolutely thrilled to be here. And just want to make sure, can everybody hear me okay? Good, awesome, great. So as Aisling said, I am Sarah Salvaci Hernandez. I currently am in the United States. I live on land that is indigenous to the Podunk Indians in Connecticut. I am fourth generation Penobscot myself. As super autistic, I like to say ADHD, because I also have the ADHD profile with being autistic, and I also am deaf. And so I'm a fun time. This is my passion. I'm super appreciative of all of you who are here right now. In my heart, there is no greater love language to me than learning together. And I appreciate you all being here because I learned so much from you. So to that effect, I want to invite you, as I am doing the talk, if you want to make any comments or connections or share anything in the chat. I won't be able to attend to it during the conversation, but I will go back to it because it's important for me that you know how much I value you being here, and I am here to see you too. And so Aisling is going to help me with that, with questions, which I super appreciate. But we will be taking small breaks so I can check in with you and make sure, you know, that you're heard, and also have opportunities to ask for clarification as needed. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, because today we are going to be talking about the sensory of self-advocacy. And I have made this super fancy, so please bear with me as I figure out how to go into presentation mode. Can everybody see my slides? Perfect. All right. So today's talk, we're going to talk about the sensory of self-advocacy. And I'm not going to, I like to say my name. It's very fun. It's a stim for me, but I will spare you. I won't say it again. But the name I will say is one of my co-creators, which is Greg Bohealer. Greg, if you could give a wave. Greg is a occupational fieldwork student from the University of North Carolina. I say student, and we both, Greg is openly autistic, and we both are PDA, which means that we don't put a lot into power hierarchies. And so Greg and I have had a wonderful time working together, and he's brought a lot to this project, so I appreciate him. The other people that I want to extend my gratitude to is the autistic community. I would be nowhere without them. Some of you here, all of you here, truly, whether you identify as autistic or you identify as an ally, community is something that keeps me moving forward and keeps me resting when I need to, engaging in whole movement so that we can do this hard work for advocacy. I've learned so much from other autistic people, and I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you. Moving forward today, what are we going to learn about? These are like 3 things. If we hang out together, we're going to be hanging out together for an hour and a half, and then there will be a half hour for questions and conversation. So during that time, if I could cross my fingers and hope that you get something out of this, these 3 things are it. I want to validate and I help identify the neuro-divergent sensory experience, and that also to reinforce that it's unique to the neurodivergent individual. Because it is unique to the individual, it's important for you and for me to understand the role of regulation and different techniques that we can use to help affirm our sensory needs and meet them in a safe and vulnerable space. And then the last bit is to, as a group, explore some of those sensory strategies that maybe as yourself you've used to help manage that sensory dysregulation or overwhelm, or some things that you've seen that have been useful for other people. I'm going to share some things that are helpful for me, and we're going to share some things that are helpful for you if you like. So the first thing that I always do when I am thinking about a topic, I go to the definition. What is self-advocacy, right? People sometimes, it's like a generic thing to start a paper or start a conversation with a definition. That actually, as an autistic person, has a lot of meaning to me because I put so much value into the words that we choose to use. And so I said, all right, I want to know what the definition of self-advocacy is. And I popped it into the Google search. And what I found was that self-advocacy, if you can believe it, according to the literature, is super accessible. And please know that I smile when I'm being sarcastic. So according to the literature, self-advocacy, or the process of advocating for yourself and your needs, has 3 components. And those 3 components that you should have in order to be able to go out there and get what you need and live your life include knowing yourself, knowing what you need, and knowing how to get it. So at this point, I have to be honest with you. My autistic heart is happy because if you can give me a 1, 2, 3, that's a system and I like it. So let's start with the very first part of the system, knowing yourself. In the literature, what are they talking about when they say you should know yourself? Well, according to the studies, what they specifically mean is that you should have access to and an understanding of standardized tests that are meant to show you your areas of deficit, meaning areas that you might need a little support in, or actually more support in than quote unquote typical people. But specifically, the literature places tremendous value on these assessments and what these assessments tell us. Now, I have been in the professional world for a very long time, and I have seen what I call two truths, the two truths of this. And the first truth is that at the literature level, at the academic understanding level, yes, there is tremendous value in being able to understand how your experience is. However, there is a negative effect of understanding what your experience is as and who you are in a way that is broken or seen as broken by the medical community. What we know about when we use what's known as deficit-based model, although we can say, okay, this is factual statements, we also need to include identity affirming language. And that is something that is not often seen if it's in the medical community or the education community. I want to pause really briefly and apologize for not doing this in the beginning. But some of these things, I am going to be presenting a positive side, but some of these things may be a little upsetting. So if you need to turn off your camera, or if you need to take a break or get a drink, if you don't feel comfortable, do what makes you feel comfortable. You can leave if you need to and come back. But please know that reaction may be valid, because it's upsetting. It's upsetting to think about a world that wants to define us by deficits. The other thing is that there are additional barriers to assessment. Number one, we're dealing with a medical model, which seems that as baseline sees us as a less than. Two, we're dealing with a medical model that may not have the ability for access, meaning you might not be able to get these standardized assessments. You might not be able to, not just from an insurance standpoint, but often it takes many appointments, lots of transportation needs, lots of executive function needs, making lists, meeting appointments, be there on time. I'm not on time for a single thing. If it's up to me, I'm not going to be on time. That is part of who I am. And when I'm seeking out services and supports and systems who demand compliance from me, I'm often going to be unsuccessful. So we do have that barrier to knowing yourself. Another barrier that we don't talk about often is that the people who are giving these assessments are not autistic or neurodivergent or whatever population it is. A lot of times these are neurotypical people who have learned about this diagnoses or these diagnoses from other neurotypical people. I've seen it said, and it's truth, I think a group of autistics can identify and diagnose an autistic much better than any professional. Like, alone, I feel that I am more qualified to do that, because as an autistic person, I am the expert of my experience. And so we know that the people who are giving the assessments and the people that they have learned from are not even experts. So we need to acknowledge these things so that we can reclaim and take back some of this power. All right, there's step one. We've identified, okay, yeah, sure, we do need to know some of these things, but there are some barriers. All right, what's step two? Know what you need. So once you have gone along the process of using all these assessments and understanding all the interpretations and understanding, quote unquote, who you are, which is really often somebody else's definition of you. Now it's your responsibility, even though you may have issues with sensory overwhelm, or you might feel uncomfortable with communication styles. It's still up to you to go and know what you need. And 3 is know how to get it. But when we talk about know what you need, what the literature is specifically mentioning are supports. And those supports come often in the form of accommodations and modifications. And I want to bring this up because I think that people should know that there's accommodations and modifications are 2 different things. A modification is when you change the very foundational, fundamental thing. So for example, if I have a modification to an environment, I am changing the environment itself, maybe installing a ramp. Maybe I am adding accessibility services to a website. That is a modification. It changes the point of access for everybody. An accommodation is when there's something about the environment or the task that is being changed specifically so that a single individual can access. So my accommodations are specific to me. The reason that I want to mention this is that oftentimes when things are presented as an accommodation, it's presented as if that accommodation is for a population. That's not true. An accommodation is for an individual. And so you should never be denied your personal accommodations just because somebody else didn't need them. You have a right to what you need, and you have a right to define what it is that you need. 3, all right. So we know ourselves. We know what we need. We think, okay, we might need some modifications. I might need to do something that completely overhauls the system so it improves access for everybody, or I might need some accommodations that help me to access as an individual, and I need to know how to get it. Well, in America, when we talk about how to get things, we are protected by law. There are several laws that protect us, meaning marginalized people, including the disability community. And it depends on the system, whether in education, it's IDEA, or in community, the ADA. But what is important for me to mention is that these systems are very procedural. So now we know how to get it, but we also, this requires something which I am never, 10 out of 10 times, I don't like. You know what that is? Asking permission for something I know I need. As an autistic person, there's very little that stirs my rebellious heart than the idea that I need to ask permission to have the things I need to exist. So even encountering the system is, for me, a difficult space to consent. Consent is very key in this whole process. And so I have to consent to the idea that somebody or something has authority over me. I don't do that well, and I'm not going to start now, because there's a genuine problem. There are so many barriers. And if we go back to number 1, which is know yourself, we've already identified that there are just tremendous barriers to this process. We already know that the people who are involved in this process are often not experts of the process. And we already know that we're consenting to systems that can deny us, that can exclude us. And this barrier, I cannot understate how deleterious the impact of the ableism in these simple steps of self-advocacy are. And I want to be explicit why it bothers me. Because suicide is one of the leading causes of death for autistic people. In studies across the world, I am either 3 times more likely, 8 times more likely than a typical person to commit suicide. If I walk in to a hospital in the United States and I walk in with somebody who is a neurotypical person, I am 20 times more likely to die. And to me, that is unacceptable. It is unacceptable because as somebody who has participated in academia, yada, yada, I know how long it takes to get research to reflect reality. A typical study, so where I'm pulling these fun facts from, takes from inception 7 years. So this 20 times more likely to die is already old information. And I have to say that if continued in some of these ableist, racist, really, really biased systems, if we continue, it's not going to get better. But I do believe in the power of community. I believe in the power of empowered identity. And I believe in the power of sharing information and creating difference. And that's what we're doing here together. Genuinely, I cannot thank you enough for being here. I want to dig in, and I'm going to be talking about some different barriers to very specific barriers to knowing yourself, but I want to check in on the chat. If anybody has any questions or if you have any thoughts or connections, I'll give a little bit of space. Or if you want to verbalize them, that's fine by me. Okay. Well, I will come back to the chat and after this next portion. But let me get right on back to sharing my screen. Okay. So what are some of the barriers to knowing yourself? I sat with this and I thought about this really specifically for myself and for the people who are typical to me in my community. I have to say, and it seems a little odd to say, but I'm really atypical for my community. Why? Because the average age of life expectancy of somebody diagnosed with autism in the United States is 40. And I turned 42 yesterday. So I am an autistic elder. And that's a horrible thing for me personally to sit with, because what that means is I don't have very many other people that I can go to help me through the process of knowing myself. Though there is hope and there is community. And we're going to talk about that. But some other things that kind of get in the way, the developmental trajectory, meaning, all right, when we talk about things like play, and somebody like me who I do OT, and play is the primary occupation of children. Children should only ever be playing. I value it so much. But I'm told often that I'm deficit in play, which holy moly is super wrong. I love playing, but I just play differently. And so therefore, the ways that I play, which are valid and beautiful, are pathologized, and to the point of being often not accepted in spaces. And therefore, if as a child, I'm not able to engage and play in the way that helps me to develop, my developmental trajectory, meaning what I look like as an adult, is going to be impacted by that. As I mentioned before, lack of representation. I am Indigenous, but I am very white. I'm super white. So I don't have, I have the privilege of being a white person. And I also have the intersection of being Indigenous and often having my Indigenous identity erased. And that triggers deep wounds in me as somebody who is an autistic person, because many people try to erase my being autistic. And so it just shoots my hypervigilance up when those types of things happen. And that's why it's so important for me to see people and connect with people who are like me. Because you know what's really cool? I'm not the only autistic OT. There's so many of us now that when I say I came out, oh my goodness, so many beautiful neurodivergent occupational therapists began unmasking. When I see people who are Black and represent and standing and saying, witness me, I am here and I'm valuable and important. You see other people be empowered to claim that identity, and it's so important because you're not alone. And when you're not alone, you know you're not broken. That's the secret. You're not broken. But negative implicit bias, people think you are. Do you know what a fun time it is for me to be an OT and talk to other OTs who treat autism? Oh, the implicit bias is beyond. Meaning that even though I stand shoulder to shoulder with these people, I'm still seen as less than. The implicit bias has tremendous impact on the individual. As an OT working in the field, when I work with parents of newly diagnosed autistic children, the ways that we talk about being autistic set up that child's life. And when the people who are informing what it means to be autistic have implicit bias and think that we're broken, the parent thinks they're broken too, because most parents see nothing wrong with their child. They know that their child is perfect as it is, but it's other people coming in and saying that it's wrong. And so parents think that they're doing it wrong. And they ignore who they are. So as an autistic parent, barriers to knowing. Just that bias, lack of identification. Sometimes people, again, can't get the formal identification, and they feel as though if they don't have access to a formal identification, they don't have a right to the identity. And what I want to say is the diagnosis of autism is not the definition of being autistic. The diagnosis and diagnostic criteria are not the definition of autism, but we often think that. Employment. This turns people on their head a little bit, because we often think about, but when you have a job, having a job is so important. Being employed is so important. We focus so much on that. We focus so much on the literature that says 80% of autistic people are underemployed or unemployed. And so, of course, we say, yes, we need to get people employed. I don't know about that. Because the employment systems themselves are set up often with capitalist values that devalue a person. And the reality is, as an autistic person, we have sensitivities and we have ways of being that when you force noxious things on us, these societal expectations that we will never be able to reach, because that is we're just we're autistic and we're not supposed to meet them. But when you have a job that sets these expectations for you, and just by existing, they expect you to fail, that becomes a barrier to truly knowing who you are and how you work in the ways that you work best for you. The other thing is that often we have co-occurring, potentially, or co-occurring diagnoses, or we've been misdiagnosed. As a female, you name it. I want to say, like, it's really funny when my therapist would come to me with new diagnoses, and I'd be like, no, stop trying to diagnose me with that. So the ones that I often got were bipolar. And why I mentioned things like bipolar, borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, is those are also valid neurotypes that deserve support for them. And so as an autistic person, I deserve supports for me, and understanding what supports I need only benefits my brothers and sisters, siblings who have different neurotypes. But they also, so sometimes they'll say, oh, you can't be autistic. The other thing that I see that's kind of cruddy, people take away diagnoses. I don't like that either. I've unfortunately see that a lot. I worked in inpatient adolescent mental health. And one of the most, for me as an autistic person, difficult things to see were actually other autistic people who were in my clients in the inpatient have their autism diagnosis taken away because they could talk. Oh my God. And to me, like, so many of you understand, because we're, many of us are autistic adults, and there's no services for us unless, in the United States, unless you're diagnosed and you receive services as a child. So the implication of a 17-year-old losing their diagnoses when that was their only, like, that's the one very tiny entry point to receive services as an adult, huge. This isn't working. It's not working. We have to make it work for us. And so part of the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how do we make this work for us? And when there comes a point as an advocate where I'm like, I don't agree with you, and I'm just going to start defining things on my own, because this is wrong, wrong, wrong. And we're just not going in a direction that's supportive of neuro-divergent self-advocacy. And so where do we start? How do we start? Why is it important? Well, at a basic level, every single one of us, whether we're autistic or not autistic, neurodivergent, neurodiverse, and we'll talk about some of those terms, but you have a right to self-determination. What is self-determination? My good friend Tara Vance, who I hope is here, is the CEO of Neuroclastic. I am on the advisory board for them. And Tara does a lot of work to create spaces for neurodivergent people to engage in self-determination. And this is the definition: the process by which people, us, you, me, control their own lives without oppressive or controlling outside forces. What do I mean by an oppressing or controlling outside force? I mean any system, person, place, or thing that wants me to consent to their system, to their authority, to connection with them, to interaction with them. I have a fundamental right to determine who I am, what I want to do, and how I want to do it outside of the influence of oppressive and controlling forces. Why is this important? Because when people are given enough personal autonomy and agency, they are able to naturally adapt, given their unique neurology, personality, and developmental trajectory. What a wonderful world. This is the one that we are creating together right now. At this point, we acknowledge that right for every single individual and ourselves. That's the scariest person to acknowledge it for. We have our right to determine who we are. As somebody who works in identity development, I'm gonna tell you a secret. It's really bad. I'm 3 classes away from qualifying, sitting for my qualifying exams for my PhD. My PDA has kicked in so bad. I don't know if I'm gonna get it. But if I do get it, what it will be in, or what it currently is in, is identity development. And so I do a lot about like, okay, well, what is autistic identity? Because remember, we don't have that representation. We don't really know what it looks like for a healthy, whole autistic adult to be in the world. But I think we're learning. And I think I see in the next generation, in our children, especially people, I'll pat myself on the back, autistic parents who are parenting authentically. My son's so cool. Yes. I know identity development occurs with other people. So a lot of times we're taking in the information. Okay, I'm going to do this thing. How does it feel? Self-determination. I like it. I don't like it. What about the other people around me? Okay, maybe they don't like it. Do I care if they don't like it? Usually the answer is no. If I like it, right? And so it's this interaction, the transactions, the exchange, but the only way that you're able to develop this authentic sense of identity, which is autistic, I think. I don't think there's any other way to be just authentic, is if I can determine for myself. And when I can determine for myself, do I like this? Do I not? What am I going to do with it? It leads to improved mental wellness. We know this. In the literature, it says every single time you are empowered to make a choice, it leads to increased quality of life, decreased anxiety, decreased depression. I mean, we can go through all, it's like a confetti, woo, 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 of all the wonderful things that being empowered and having voice and choice, the positive impact on mental wellness. I mean, it's a lot. And that leads to self-advocacy. You have to feel, not just have this sense of identity, you have to feel supported. You have to know that you have allies, that you have community, that you have systems in place that you can fall back on, because self-advocacy is hard. Because the reality is, again, in the current system, I'm consenting to authority oftentimes when I'm self-advocating. And if I'm consenting to the authority hierarchy in a system, I might be told no. And that's devastating, honestly. I have what they call it rejection sensitive dysphoria. Rejection feels deadly to my systems. It's life-threatening. I don't know how to say it a different way, because I experience sensory so acutely. Again, because it is so, like, it's life or death critical for me, for you, for everybody to understand who they are, we should only be creating spaces that allow for authenticity. And what I have to say is we got to be like for real with each other. What does that mean? What does that mean? Are you going to accept authentic Sarah? Are you? Are you really? Because I'm a fun, like I describe my personality as chaos kitten. Can you handle that? And it's okay to establish boundaries for yourself. It's okay for me to establish boundaries too. That's part of developing authenticity. We have to not only have spaces that allow for that, we have to have people who allow for that. And that's a rebellion, to just accept somebody for who they are. And especially when we start like applying labels. But it's the most freeing thing in the world, because once you stop judging other people, you're like, what the heck am I doing with me? And that's another truth. You might have to change. And part of the thing is change is really hard. And I'm going to go, like, I love looking up theories and models. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm talking about, oh, you might have to change. Well, what is change? Change involves anger, denial, acceptance, exploration. There's so many parts to change. I have to also make space for me to be angry. That's righteous. I have plenty to be angry about. That's another, well, that's another day. But in order for me to get to the part where I'm changing, I have to make space for those feelings. And as uncomfortable as some of those feelings are, I have a right to feel them, and I have a right to regulation. We're going to talk about regulation. We're going to talk about neurodivergent sensory processing. I just want to very quickly note that neurodiversity and being neurodivergent are two different things. Neurodiversity, the definition is, let me get it, limitless variability of human cognition and the uniqueness of each human mind. This is an updated definition from Judy Singer, who coined the term neurodiversity. It's a widely used as a political term. It's meant to be inclusive. Neurodiversity recognizes all the people, all the brains, all the different neurotypes, all the ways of being. And the political, I don't think it's political, it's like the human rights side of it is that the neurodiversity paradigm believes from each according to their ability and to each according to their need. That everybody has a brain, everybody has their abilities, and everybody deserves support. So that is a very like simplistic view of neurodiversity. Now, what does it mean to be neurodivergent? Neurodivergent is a term that was coined in the 1990s by an Asian autistic activist named Neurodivergent K. You can find them on social media. I've included references if you would like to visit those sources. And Neurodivergent K says that to be neurodivergent, it means deviating from normative expectations, and being neurodivergent is an identity. Like, I don't know if you can see in my little thing, I put my name and then my pronouns, she, her, and then I have that little IFL that stands for identity first language. So specifically meaning I say neurodivergent is my identity. I say being autistic is my identity. There is nothing about me that is separate from being autistic, and I wouldn't want it to be. The good things, the bad things, all my bad things really usually are just outside problems. And I want to highlight this. This is so cool for me. So as an OT, my profession in the United States is starting to catch up a little bit, tiny bit. I'm going to be hard on them. But recently, this year, 2021, they have come to the definition as being autistic as being divergent. So divergent ways for the brain to think, learn, perceive, and process information from the senses. That's the current American Occupational Therapy Association's definition of being autistic. My heart, I can't even tell you how happy that makes me. Oh, okay. All right. So that was a big windup. What I'm gonna go, I'm gonna take a pause. I'm gonna check in with the chat. What we have left now is, now that we're all on the same page, we deserve to figure it out with each other. I'm gonna talk a very little bit about what sensory processing is, and then get straight into the advocacy component. So I will pause. Any questions, comments, concerns? Oh, Tara's here. Woohoo! Thank you, Tara. Tara and I are troublemakers. Any questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Well, then, Aisling, if it's okay, I'm going to do the sensory. I'm trying to keep eyeballing the time. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to do the sensory processing talk, and then we'll do like a 5-minute stretch water break.
Perfect. Sounds good.
All right. And if anybody has any question, comments, or concerns, the chat is there. But I'm going to hop right back into it then. Awesome. All right. Sensory processing. I'm a singer. I don't know if I'm good, but that's, I think that if I could have my choice for communication, I would only sing and never talk. So I might start singing at some point. Sensory processing is my jam, my jelly. It is my love. It is how I understand the world. Shockingly, the sensory processing theory has only been around since the 1990s. When somebody started thinking, hey, maybe the way that we take in information into our bodies, in the ways that we do and the ways that we understand it, maybe that matters. So sensory processing is a theory that was written by Winnie Dunn. Winnie Dunn is still currently a professor at the University of Missouri. And I can't talk to her. Like, I have actually like a very good friend in the same department as her, and I just can't talk to her because I fangirl that much about this theory. What it says is that, very simply, information is received in through your body. It can be received out from outside. This is called exteroception, or it can be received from inside your body. This is called interoception. For example, a touch on the skin. If I were to touch myself on my skin, that would be an example of exteroception, a tactile form of input. If I have my belly, which hurts right now, I had a procedure, I had a hysterectomy on Friday. I had a big procedure. That pain and the pain in that area that's informing me is known as interoception. And those are things that happen inside of our bodies. And another type of processing is known as neuroception, and that occurs in the brain. So we have information. It's coming at us from somewhere. It could be a thing, it could be a noise, it can be an emotion, it can be an experience, it can be a memory, but that information travels to our brain. And our brain, first of all, at the base brain back here, does a check. Fight, flight, fright. Are you safe? And if that information passes the check, then it travels into the different parts of my brain in which I start to create an action plan. Okay, well, here's this information. I'm going to catalog it against all the different bits of information that I have floating around in my brain. And once I process the sensory information, my brain creates an action plan, which it then communicates to the rest of my body. So there's 73,000 million billion ways that this can go awry. And there's 73,000 million billion plus times a million ways that this can go really well too. And one of the things about being autistic is that we experience sensory more intensely. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'll go back to my original stimuli. That's the fancy word. The stimuli of me touching myself. Let me tell you something. I do not like a soft touch. Whatever in my brain, my past experiences, the integrity of my skin, the way my skin feels, if it's cold, if it's hot, if it's whatever, typically I don't like people to lightly touch me to the point that I don't even like it for myself, right? So when I do that, when I initiate it, that information goes up to my brain and it goes to the amygdala, which is right at the back. And my amygdala is like, are you safe? Well, my body says, probably not, because I don't like it. Once that I have this feeling of being unsafe kicks in, there's automatic processes that also start. Things to keep me safe. My heart rate goes up. I start breathing faster. So now, not only do I have this one sensation of soft touch on my skin, my body is starting to respond in different ways. And my amygdala is like, you don't feel safe, but you seem to be committed to following this through. So, okay. And then that information goes into my brain, hopefully, fingers crossed, reaches all the way up to the front of my brain, which is where I have the ability to engage in something called executive function. And executive function is the space where we make good decisions, self-determination, right? So critical for us to be able to form our identity through the decisions that we make in the front of our brain. Then with those, the decisions that we've come to, we're putting a lot of hope on our body because our brain's like, all right, body, this is what you're going to do. So if somebody, something, me, touches my arm softly, I'm going to say, all right, Sarah, this is what I want you to do. I want you to just take a drink of water. And I'm able to follow through with that plan. But what you didn't see is that the action plan, because the sensory was so dysregulating and because I persisted through this discomfort of a real and true neurological event of discomfort, my actions, I almost spilled water all over myself. You didn't see that, but it's true. And the reason is because my motor planning has been affected by the fact that I'm engaging in a sensory experience that I don't like. And the reality is that people go through that every day and it's not fair. It's not fair. And the other side of that, and what I actually do like to talk about, I said I was going to be happy at some point. We're getting there. But just as intensely as I feel the discomfort of noxious stimuli, things that I don't like, I also intensely feel joy from the things that I do like. And so why wouldn't I want to take that knowledge about myself and bring more things that I love in? Because I need the intensity of that input in order to help me to make good choices, access that front brain, and to help me to be able to bodily engage in the things that I want to do. Simple enough, right? No. This is one of those theories, models that is real. It's once you get it, your sensory brain clicks on, but it feels like a lot because it is a lot. We are magical beings. Our bodies are super cool. There is nothing that is normal about any of us. And so for a second, let me talk to you a little bit about some of the really cool ways that the body receives and uses information. Sensory processing specifically, I've included for you the big fancy terms and then, the more typical terms that you might hear. So the systems that it includes are visual, seeing, auditory or hearing, gustatory, which is tasting, olfactory, which is smelling. These are known as the big five. Like when when I went to kindergarten, this was like, in order for me to get through life, I need to know that I can smell. But these are the 5 things that I was expected to know. What I want to reinforce to you is that with sensory processing, I'm not just looking at the stimuli. I'm also, it's like critical to consider how somebody perceives that information. So when we talk about perception, we're talking about like what's happening in the current moment, and it's paired and checked against what's happened previously. So processing is a tremendously complex process of weaving all of those truths together and then creating an action plan. Some other types of sensory information that the literature talks about that I like geeking out and doing deep dives over include proprioception. Proprioception is very simply the pushing and pulling that happens to your body, and the information that's received by the joints and the muscles of your body. One of my favorite places to offer proprioception and to receive proprioception is my hands. Why? Because my hands have 26 joints in them. That's a lot of opportunities for proprioception. That's why it feels so good. I call it contained proprioception. So anytime someone talks down about Play-Doh, I get so mad because Play-Doh is magic. Why? Because you're playing with it. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. Regulating. I love, okay, remember I worked in patient mental health. I like an honest person. I want to know where you are. And so when I see someone's hand clenched like that, you know what that tells me? You really want to be here with me. You're trying really hard. You're giving yourself input to help you stay and do the things that you either want to do or you perceive that you need to do. But that's proprioception. Other examples, weightlifting. One of my favorite things to do is throw ice cubes. Whole big body movement. Going in the pool is uniform from proprioception pressure on your body. Another type is vestibular, which has to do with movement and moving where you are in relation to the horizon. Little babies, you might not do this to little babies. I do it, but it's legit. It's like actually my job. But sometimes if you poke a baby, they'll kind of self-correct and come back up. We do that to help them to get their core muscles ready for sitting up, because automatically your body wants to correct to keep you at your eyes at the level of the horizon. And vestibular is found in the inner ear, and helps facilitate that process. And finally, interoception, which is just like I said, it's so many things. It is feeling hungry, it's feeling tired, it's feeling sick, it's the pain, of somebody who experiences chronic pain. You know, if you're somebody who experiences chronic pain, that the way that you experience other sensory information is different on your high pain days. You know that when you're tired, sounds are way bigger. Like if I've stayed up too late and my children have the perfect idea of waking me up at 5 a.m., my sensory feels a lot different than if my children kindly allow their mother to sleep till 8. So those are some examples of interoceptions. The way the brain likes to get that information are known as strategies. We can have active strategies, which are things that we're engaging in the moment. It's like creating. An active strategy that I use, I'm gonna my finger, a finger stimmer. That's an active strategy for me to help me regulate. And passive strategies are either planned activities or structural supports. So active strategies are things that I'm doing, and passive strategies are spaces, people, places, systems that make it so that I can engage in my active strategies and do the things. And both are really important because each one of these systems has its own threshold. Like it's not enough that we need to know that we have all of this sensory information, but each individual system has a threshold, meaning a low threshold says, I only need a little bit of stimulation in order for me to be aware. So for an example, I have a low threshold for tactile or touch. It only takes one little touch for me to be very hypervigilant and aware that I need to pay attention to things that are touching my body. Where some people have a high threshold, which means that they have a big old cup, they need a lot of input before they're even aware. These are the people who I don't understand, who you could be like, hello, hey, and it takes like a couple of times of like tapping them, or maybe they might have like, oh, I don't want to say anything that sounds judgmental because it's not, I'll say, like maybe they have egg on their face. I would notice that immediately. They don't notice, genuinely. They might not notice because it hasn't registered in their brain that they have to pay attention. And so what I want to say is like, whoa, that's so much. But once you understand that this is real, it's neurological, it's neuro-based, this isn't hippie woo stuff. People try to tell me that it's like, oh, sensory. Well, that's just because you don't understand how profound it is. And I'll give you a little bit of grace for that. Because it is really powerful. I want to know difference between sensory processing and sensory integration. I don't really have too much beef with sensory integration, except that the expressed goal of sensory integration is to change the neurological baseline through habituation and sensitization, meaning getting somebody used to a stimuli or helping them see or experience stimuli. There's nothing wrong with my brain. And so I get very snarly when people bring up sensory integration, just because I want to make sure that we're keeping it centered and that the person that we're supporting is special, perfect, and precious. And we're only there to help support them to find themselves. I'm not there to tell them who they are. This is a Galway 2021 update. I have a 1, 2, 3. For the first time, I'm changing. I used to say validate sensory, but today I'm going to say validate vulnerability. Because in order for me to know my sensory profile and my sensory experiences, I have to feel safe enough with people and places that I can say, I don't like this, and it will be respected. That is vulnerable. That is brave. That is hard. But we can use sensory processing very simply to say, I like this, I don't. I like this, I don't, and build my likes and put boundaries around my don't likes. The other thing that's important with sensory is sensory helps validate our communication. I want to say this to every single one of you. You have a right to communicate from a space of regulation. If somebody is forcing you to answer, if it's verbally, if it's through your AAC device, anyway, if they're trying to force you to answer, they're taking advantage of you. Because when you are dysregulated, you may be impulsive. You may be in trauma. The responses that you are going to communicate may not be your true and regulated response, and you have a right to regulated communication. And you can use sensory to validate community. When we talk about these things, it sheds the stigma. When I sit here, hopefully, and stim away in front of you and present, I hope that there's somebody like me in here, you know, and knowing that, it makes you not feel alone. And community is so key. Before I get into the strategies, I need to take a 5-minute break. But if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can also pop them in. So, oh yeah, that works out well. So 8:15.
Okay. So Sarah, if we take a break now and come back for 8:15, give everyone an opportunity to use the bathroom, get tea, coffee, anything. All right, we'll see you at 8:15. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay. Thank you.
right on time.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. And I saw you answered a few questions there in the chat, Sarah.
Yeah, before I continue, are there any other questions? Feel free to ask them in the chat, or you can communicate them verbally, or I'll put right here. If you have questions, you can feel free to email me. I put my email in there for you.
I'll take this opportunity, sorry to interrupt you, Sarah, as well. So while we are recording this evening's session, we are going to stop recording right when Sarah is finished. So if people do want to ask questions verbally, but they don't feel comfortable being on camera, or they don't feel comfortable with having their voice recorded, the question section is not going to be recorded. And also, as Sarah said earlier, if anyone wants to turn off their camera, if they want to keep themselves muted and type anything, whatever makes you comfortable, please feel free to do so.
All right, thank you. Well, then we are going to keep on keeping on and talk about, all right, now we're hopefully, fingers crossed, we talked about this at the beginning. I hope you're all on board with me. And that, you have a right to something called self-actualization, which is realizing about yourself. So understanding yourself as a sensory person, a sensory being. You have a right to self-determination. You have a right to determine whether or not you like something, and you have a right to include the things that you like in your life. And 3, you have a right to advocate to the people, places, and things that are important that you're deciding that you want to engage in. And sensory specifically can help you support that engagement. Sensory does not always have to be calming. A lot of times people think, oh, sensory helps when you're really calm or you're upset. That is true. And another way that sensory is helpful is it can be alerting. Here. My favorite sensory hack of all time is peppermint essential oil. I have a lot, and I'll talk about them. But this is this can be alerting or soothing based on how I use it. And so sometimes the peppermint really helps me if I am, maybe I'll need it right now. If you're in the middle of a talk and it's going on and on and on, and you need something to help bring you back to center, this is a great smell. But sometimes I want to be to center for calming. One of my favorite things is when I was in school, I would use this before a test, and it became so popular in grad school that I would have people line up like some kind of blessing, I don't know, and they would get like little bits of essential oil, and our whole room would smell like essential oil. We'd all be primed and ready to go for our test. Another type of sensory strategy that people don't talk about a lot, and I want to cognitive strategies are part of sensory processing, because when you defer some of the cognitive stuff to things like maybe a to-do list or having a visual checklist or having what I call an accountability buddy, somebody who's accountable with me and helping me, like if I forget, it's okay because I had this person, or maybe it's my Google reminder in place. Any of those spaces that I can remove the cognitive load of the labor of remembering something is also important to sensory, because then it creates more neurological space and time for me to be able to process the sensory that may be coming at me. And then with sensory, some of the other ways that you can use it, you can increase or decrease the intensity, frequency, or duration. A lot of times people think when they're using sensory, they have to take and do different things each time. So right now, I'm like looking at all my sensory stuff. I'm a big crocheter, you know, so like all my things that I have right here that help me with sensory. Sometimes people think you have to grab different things that are going to be helpful for you, when that's not true. You can take the one thing that you really know that you like and increase the intensity or the frequency with that you're using it. Maybe you've got to be like, all right, this lady keeps talking way too much, and so I need to take a sniff of this every minute because I need to. Or the duration. You can either like carry it out for longer if that's helpful for you, or decrease the duration. One of my favorite things to do that is super dysregulating for me is I like to go to the amusement park. Woo! Give me loop-de-loos and whirls and all sorts of things, but I have to be very careful. My duration can only be very, very short, because it only takes a little bit of that to alert me. If I go to the amusement park and I go on more than 4 rides, then I will have insomnia, because that's sensory. So we're going to talk about some of my favorite strategies and some of my favorite things that I do while I'm having this conversation. We, in about 10 minutes, are going to go to questions and comments, connections. So please think in your head, like, what are some things that you really enjoy at a sensory level? Make your body feel good. You might also want to think about things that you don't like. Maybe sound is really overwhelming for you. And even just to be in the space of validating that that's difficult. Whatever you need, we're here. Because I hope that we can share a little bit toward the end. So, classroom. Here's the problem. I don't ever want to leave a classroom. So I have a lot of strategies for a classroom. I love school growing up. I have taught all the way through graduate school and colleges, and I still seek out any opportunity to educate. But being in a classroom is kind of difficult for me. And so some of the things that I do to help myself is, and I will often have soothing background noises, or for me, a metronome in earbuds or earphones. Oh, I don't have my headphones. But when I'm in a classroom, it is sometimes more important for me to attend to the movement in the classroom, what is going on in the classroom, and not the noise of the classroom. And so I will take steps to block that out. And the metronome for me personally is very helpful for working. When I sometimes get stuck in my brain, and having a beat helps me to move forward. That may be helpful for you. That might be the worst idea you ever heard. And both are right. You know, there's not really a wrong. For me, it's helpful to have recorded presentations, but even more than recorded presentations, it's helpful for me to have a note taker. For me in school, this was somebody that would take notes, and I would just be present in the class and participating in the ways that I could, when I could, and I would have notes that were sent to me after class so that I could kind of compare my own notes and see if I missed anything, or, you know, why I like those over recorded presentations is recorded presentations take my time and my auditory processing. I don't like that. So speaking of auditory processing, you could, some of you may benefit from audiobooks. I sure do. I really do enjoy listening to audiobooks. The way that you receive information, some of you, like if you really need to pop and keep yourself focused, have it be an accommodation that something's printed out for you in color. Or if it's too much information and you really, you want to add the color, print it out in grayscale and you can have your highlighter. So you can choose to highlight what information is important for you to know. And another favorite for me, for the big five sensory is I like having spicy gum and candy. Specifically for me, mint gum. Mint gum if I want to pay attention, and cinnamon hard candy if I want to wake up. That's what I like. What do you like? Maybe you like fruit heart candy, or I don't know. One of the things that I used to give my boys all the time that they would love, I would cut up Twizzlers. I don't know if you have those, like licorice. And this is wrong. No, it was still good, and they still liked it. I'd let it get a little stale, so it makes it chewier. They loved it. But that helped them to stay in the classroom. It helps me to stay in the classroom. Some proprioception, get there early if you want, and ask if you can set up the class. I loved putting chairs down. Because number one, I like connection and I like helping. And number two, there's a lot of proprioceptive feedback that's occurring when you're setting up a classroom, when you're passing things out. It's really beneficial and helpful. If I'm going to throw a party at my house, I wait till the day of to clean. Nothing like a good cleaning session to give me proprioceptive input and help me stay regulated. This is something I have to communicate with people. Face stretches. I have something, and it's actually very common with autistic people, called focal dystonia, which means that sometimes like muscles that I use that are not necessarily comfortable for me to use, and specifically for me, my speech muscles get very tight. And so often, like, you don't really notice it, but like my voice might sound a little different, or sometimes I can sound crabby. I'm really not, but it's just that my voice is literally like that's happening. So it's important for me to move my face and stretch my face, and maybe even like give myself a little self massage, because when I'm expected to communicate, the actual like muscles in my body need a break. Sometimes I do push-ups in my chair. I'm a chair fidgeter. I love it. And take a stretch break. Communicate before. I don't like, you really, if you need to stretch, you need to stretch. So go ahead and get up and do it. Vestibular, again, you could be wiggling to get proprioception, or you could be wiggling to make your head go back and forth. You'll see a lot of people who are on the spectrum who love rocking either side to side or back and forth. That's vestibular. It's one of the most primary and basic regulatory strategies. Just so you know, proprioceptive will give you the best immediate results. Vestibular will give you the best long-term results. So things like being in a rocking chair, or my swing, or taking a walk, going back and forth, basketball, running back and forth, any of those linear vestibular things can be very calming. And I put this on here, putting directions on the board. It could be a strategy. If you have somebody who's a seeker and who needs a lot of movement, that this could be a great strategy for them. But you could have somebody in your classroom who's sensitive to that movement. And so having them look up at the board and down and up and down can actually be dysregulating. Know yourself. Is that hard for you? If it is hard for you, then you deserve the accommodation of having something printed for you so that you don't have to look up at the board and look down. I put this in here on purpose. Interoception. Sarah, slow down. One of the best interoceptive strategies in whatever you do, sometimes we can get so dysregulated and it feels happy. Dysregulation does not necessarily mean a bad thing. I'm extremely dysregulated right now because I'm really freaking happy. I love educating. And so sometimes I need to remind myself to take a big breath in, tend to some of my autonomic needs, like my breathing, my heart rate, have snacks and water available. I don't know about you, but I don't learn when I'm hungry. I have to have a snack, or else I'm thinking about how hungry I am and I'm supposed to be learning. And belly breathing, again, just bringing things back to center can be very helpful in a classroom, because it's really easy to lose your boundaries, lose yourself. And when I say boundaries, I mean physical boundaries, like understanding where your body is. It's really hard. It's like simple to be dysregulated and not know where you end anymore, because you feel the sensory that intensely. For example, like when I get super dysregulated, I'm deaf, right? I can still hear some noises. And if my son were to come in and he was at the door just talking typically, like in his typical voice, it would sound like he was right here, because I'm dysregulated. I don't understand where the physical boundaries of my body are anymore. Cognitive, again, I write to-do lists for my to-do list. I love it. I love a list. Some people don't. Written directions with visuals. Make sure the visuals make sense. Or they're chosen by the individual that you're supporting. Like it symbolically means something to them. But sometimes people use really weird, like the visuals don't match. And that increases cognitive load. But you could also have handouts. If I know that I can just show up to a class and I'm going to have everything provided for me, that is so relieving on my brain. So relieving. Because then I don't have to deal with the shame of like, oh, great, I didn't print, blah, 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 whatever. I can pass that. But those are some sensory strategies that I use to be successful in a classroom. And then, so beyond the classroom, you know, what we see across the lifespan, we have a lot of opportunities often to collaborate with people. And some of the research that I've been reading recently about the learning that occurs through collaboration is astounding. It's really cool, like the things that people are creating when they think together. And so the reason why I'm highlighting collaboration is your voice, your perspective matters. There is not a single person like you, and nobody in the whole world understands you better than you. And when you are able to advocate and be a part of collaboration in the ways that you consent to being a part of it, everybody is better for it, including yourself. So if we're collaborating, this could be on Zoom, it could be person face-to-face, have a communication agreement. I'm a visual person. Like I usually have, like when I'm teaching and stuff, like it's not, they can't say like professor, they can't say Miss Sarah, because I can't locate that. I don't understand where sounds are coming from. And so they raise their hand, not because I'm trying to be a school marm and be all formal and fancy, but literally because I need to see it. And then I can know that you're talking to me. Another really great thing during times of collaboration is to have a hot, fragrant beverage available, which I didn't do today, which is surprising. But it can be tea, it can be coffee, it can be something just as simple as hot water, maybe with lemon in it. But holding something, having something to hold, again, remember we talked about contained proprioception. So that's always a soothing anchor. And when you can add a pleasing fragrance, so mint tea, hot chocolate, it also helps, it can help improve mood. There's a lot of olfactory aromatherapy literature out there, but you know, if I have a hot chocolate, I'm usually in a better mood when I'm in a group. That's a great accommodation. Turning off your camera. You don't have to have your camera on. You can have your camera on. Maybe having your camera on helps you pay attention. You do you. Do what's best for you. Wear comfortable clothing and textures that you like. A sensory strategy can be very much the shirt that you put on in the morning. If I know that I'm going to have to do something difficult, the worst thing that I can ever wear is tight pants. Why? Because the seams and it's constricting and I don't like it. And I'm more focused on the dysregulation or discomfort of my clothes. And then I also have the discomfort and dysregulation of expectations or a task. And these two discomfort, dysregulation forces combine, and I'm just antsy-pantsy and not paying attention. Where I can wear clothes that help me to focus. I often wear a scarf as something to hold on to, something, I often will wear heavy jewelry because this is a good thing for me to give me that proprioception around my neck. It gives me something visually to look at, something to sim with and play, but use your clothes as part of your support strategies. Taking a movement break, great way, great proprioception. Think about those big muscles in your body. Our bodies are made to develop and to move from the big muscles to the little muscles. In fancy speak, we call it proximal to distal. So make sure that when you are doing movements for yourself, you're not just doing the small finger, fine motor, these kind of movements. You're also doing the big, large muscle, big movements. That's quality proprioception. Having clubs, like, you want to get me really into a project. If I have people to crochet with, I'm going to change the world, because we'll just sit there and make a million wonderful ideas together crocheting. And another thing that I like are power poses. Again, going back to that big movement. So like often like raising your hands up and being like V for victory kind of thing. That's known as a power pose, but at a physiological level, you're giving yourself tremendous proprioceptive input in your shoulder girdle, your shoulders. So maybe we're V for victory, or maybe we're just doing proprioception, who knows, but it works. Vestibular, two things. Sometimes when you're collaborating, you might have to like go somewhere. Do you want to drive alone or with a group? Some people, they really do well driving with a group. I have to drive by myself. There is no way. Like, I need a break before, during, and after with conversations and things like that. So it's just a better idea either for me to drive by myself or to have somebody who's not related to what I'm doing drive me. So maybe like my friend, drop me off somewhere. The other thing for collaboration that can help you, that's a sensory strategy to kind of keep you, is to help you engage. Save seats. Listen, people who are neurodivergent, we're either really early or late. That's the truth. Why? We struggle with transitions. It's literally a feature of my autism, right? I struggle with transitions. So of course, even as an adult going to some kind of workshop or presentation or training, the idea of a bunch of people milling about and like networking or doing that weird like network / let me tell you a little bit about my family life like thing is a nightmare for me. I don't enjoy it. So if I can have people save me a seat, then I can come in a little bit late and I'm not physically looking around to see where I can sit, because here comes my cat. The physical, actual, factual looking around, head going side to side, looking up, down, getting somebody's attention. Can I sit there? Every single movement is a dysregulation. And if somebody just saves you a seat, then you get to skip all that. That's so nice. I love it when people save me seats. For collaboration, take your medication. That's something important for me, is to realize that there's a lot of things that we're really dysregulating, and I have a right to be as regulated as I want to be. And part of that includes taking medication. And so if that's important for you, you know, seek out those supports. In America, we call them PRNs, but I think I just did this talk in India, and they call them SOS medications, but they're basically things that, like, if you are really struggling in dysregulation and you need that help, make sure you have access to it, and also a space to go, because that's going to help with your interoception cues. Sometimes my body will tell me I'm anxious, and I'm like, no, I'm not anxious, I'm just having fun. But I need something to help my heart slow down, because my brain is misinterpreting that as being anxious. Make sure you have options for clothes for temperature. If you're hot, it's hard. It's hard to engage. It's hard to collaborate. It's hard to even think sometimes. Or if you're too cold, that's also true. So make sure that you have those options, or ask for them to change the temperature in a room. Some cognitive tasks for collaborations, again, like taking the mental load and putting it somewhere else. Having clearly assigned roles. Who does what? A finished example. People who are neurodivergent, literally part of the diagnosis, like, we know in the literature that we don't visualize very well. So I'm going to spend 30 minutes anxious visualizing what the end should look like, when you could just give me a completed, like, you need to get here. I'm going to make it amazing. I'm going to put my own spin on it. So you don't need to worry so much about me copying, or even if I do copy, that's okay. Who cares? Having a finished example is a really great strategy for collaboration. Group note taker, having consistency in approach. One of my biggest things for interoception, and this is part interoception, part cognitive strategy, literally change your seat. Like, if you're feeling stuck, sometimes just getting up and moving to a different place at a cognitive and body level is necessary to give you a regulated perspective. Because if you're feeling, so for example, if I'm feeling uncomfortable in a group, it may be because I have such a low threshold for touch, and I'm hyper vigilant to other people touching me. And so if I'm in a group and the group itself is too close, I'm not going to be collaborating. I'm going to be like being very still so nobody touches me. So maybe you change your seat, maybe you move and you give yourself a little bit more space. That can literally inside be freeing. You get a breath. You don't have to be so hyper vigilant. Visually, it gives you more information. So that's something that you can do. Additional cognitive. Oh, my cognitive strategies went away. I will find them and send them to you, but I'm sure it has to-do list on there, because that seems to be a theme for me. But really, anything that you can, you know who does this really well? He's still here. Greg Bohealer, my student, really does a really beautiful job at creating materials that are very thorough and give people all the information they need to be successful. And I find that when you're collaborating in a group, that is so foundationally important, because then when somebody knows like what's expected, then they can like figure things out, and they can interact with the system in their own time and space, which is so important. That is a definition from the Maori people. They have a word for autism, which is takuatanga, and it means in our own time and space. So having these, like, sometimes it looks a little hyper prepared, like a lot. Well, great, awesome. The more you know. That's an American thing. NBC. Sorry, echolalia. Finally, going out. We don't talk about this, but listen, going out is amazing, awesome, fun, and your friends want to go out with you. They do. They love you. If you want to go out with them, they want to go out with you, and they want to have a good time with you first. I'm telling this, I'm looking at me when I say this, because again, I have rejection sensitive dysphoria. I never want to be a burden. And it's been tremendously important for me in my advocacy to realize that these requests were neurological necessity and never a burden. So some things that I've used to go out with my friends and have a good time, making sure that there's a quiet space to escape and my friends know where that is. So for example, when I was younger and I used to do the club thing, we would find out where there was always like the backdoor area where people would go out to smoke. And so if my friends couldn't find me in the club, they could go outside. They knew that I would be there. We had that communication because I needed a quiet, I enjoyed going out with them, but it's way too loud. Speaking of which, wear headphones or earplugs. That's okay. Noise is dysregulating. So protect, like, not only does your brain get tired of hearing, your ears literally get tired of hearing. Your ears have muscle or they have bones, and they have different processes that are like constantly being used, and your actual ears, your ear canal can get inflamed. That's gonna hurt your head, and it's going to make it more difficult to go out. So feel empowered. Wear headphones. What are your signs of dysregulation? Know that. I know it. For me, pink cheeks. When my cheeks start getting red, the world's in trouble. That's how you know that I'm getting dysregulated. For some people, it might be changes in speech. For other people, it might be the way that they're looking around. Maybe you're somebody who, once you get too overstimulated visually, you start looking around more because you're hyper vigilant. Know that about yourself. And if you feel comfortable, maybe share that with somebody else. My good friends and I, like, my very best friends will always be like, Sarah, and they hit their cheeks. And that tells me, I'm like, oh, girl, take a break. Some other things, getting a hot or cold drink while you're going out can be great to hold. Again, it's an anchor. It also, I like to hold a drink because I find that when I hold drinks, people don't touch me as much. It's not that I want to drink, I just don't want you to touch me. So I'm gonna hold this drink there. And it's like a shield from people touching. Get an ice cube, get a cup of ice cubes and put it against your neck. Being dysregulated can often mean being overheated. And when you're too hot, your internal functions are gonna go haywire. So it's really important for you literally to be cool, stay cool. My other favorite, a handkerchief with a scent on it. I am so low threshold with smells. And then, you know what? Some of the people I love in the most, I like hippie people. And I go out, like I go to hippie concerts. It's smelly. And I love them. I love every single one of them, and they can smell as much as they want. But you know what they do at those hippie concerts, which was really great, is they actually pass out little wristlets that have like lavender or like different types of smell, so that we can all just sit there and be like, you're so great and wonderful, but I'm gonna sit here and sniff and smell these wonderful things because it's the environment itself is too smelly for me. That's a real thing. Work out before. After, stretch, do something that involves movement if that is centering for you. Like I said before, when I have a party, I keep my house as messy as possible until the day of the party. Some people that would be too much for them. For me, it's a workout. Cleaning is a workout, and so it helps me to regulate. When I'm out and about, I find my spot. And it's the spot that I love, and it's the spot that I hold, and it's the spot that gives me proprioception that I can push against. So if it's a wall, if it's, I use like a pillar, I'll hug a pillar. If it's a person, the people that I'm with, my husband, he's my sensory anchor. I always like super like push into him because it's regulating. Another thing is head squishes. You can actually, so people forget that your skull is actually made up of a whole bunch of bones, and that the strongest joints of your body are found in your skull. And so squeezing your head really feels good. What I love to do is always will have a scarf or something to drape over my head and gently pull down. That's a type of proprioception called uniform proprioception, and it's so good. So powerful. That's why sometimes people pull their hair because they're trying to get that deep pressure and that deep pull on some of the strongest joints of their body. Vestibular, again, movement, driving by yourself with a friend or being picked up by somebody else. The activity could be movement. Walking is going to be more regulating. If you are wanting to go out and have a joyful dysregulation time, dancing is great. I found the best of both worlds because I love to dance, but I don't want people around me. I started liking country music and line dancing. Why? Because I got a box. I have a box. So interoception, check the weather, make sure you're prepared. It's miserable if you don't know that it's going to rain and you're going to go out and you show up wet. Oof, that's hard. So see what the weather is going to be. Make sure you have a snack before you go. If you're going out, bring your same foods. Like if you're going someplace and you know that you're not going to like the stuff that you're going to eat there, bring your own food, really. Breathing, keeping hydrated. This is the big one. If you need to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. Again, I'm speaking to myself. I always think that like I'm going to miss something or somebody's going to be disappointed in me if I leave, something like that. That's never true, not with your friends. Go to the bathroom if you need to. It's okay. Some cognitive strategies. I need information. The more information you can give me, the better I can prepare myself. So creating a party plan, but what I like even more than a party plan, I like an invite. Invites are fun, they're beautiful, they give me all the information I need, and it makes me feel so super special. So sometimes I'll create my own invites, or I love when people give me invites, because then I also know what to expect from the party, and I don't have to like, or whatever I'm doing, and I don't have to worry about it cognitively. Set calendar reminders, have a check-in person, but my favorite is spin outings. So spin is short for special interest. And sometimes, so I like going on spin outings, taking people to celebrate either their special interest or my special interest, because we're already guaranteed to have a good time. So all we have to do is focus on each other. Woohoo! So I will advocate for that. But I'm talking a lot. Oh my goodness, I went over. I'm so sorry. I just saw the time. I'm talking a lot about what we can do. But it's important to understand that you're not doing this by yourself. You need allies. You need supports. And what should you be hearing? This is one of my favorite pictures, graphics ever I made with my partner and all things. Kate Jones, who is an autistic illustrator who lives in Manchester, England, but she's Welsh. And that's important for me to say. She's from Wales. And she made this really beautiful graphic. And it's the things that you should hear from the people and the spaces and the places that surround you. And so I pulled out a couple that are my favorite, but I'll go through them. Just be you. Ooh, my favorite. You can rebel. Be a rebel. The rebel forces are cool. I believe you. So many times people don't feel believed for the ways that they experience things and the feelings that they have inside. I believe you. Another favorite. You can change your mind as many times as you need. If something's not right for you, you have the right to withdraw consent. You can change your mind. You have a right to communication. How you communicate. Stem all you like. Move, move, move. You are the right of movement. Move. That's a Hosier lyric. We didn't throw it in here specifically for Ireland, but right down there, there's our Hosier love. Speaking of love, I love you just as you are. Right now, not different, not where you're going to be, not where you were, right now. I accept you. Those are things that you should be hearing. If you are an ally, if you are an autistic person, what can you do? What are some action steps that we can take? First, validate vulnerability. Get a sensory profile done. That's something that can be done by many different professions. Occupational therapists certainly can do it, but there is a barrier to that in that it's the sensory profile itself is a standardized assessment. But there's a lot of free internet things out there, and just spend some time, and you are the expert. Find out what it is that you like, what you don't like, and while you're doing that, be nice to yourself. Because this might be, like, for me, 42 years old, these are some of the first times that I've ever been asked this question, or I've asked myself this question. Do I like it? Do I not? How do I bring compassion to realizing that 42 years, I was probably doing a lot of things I didn't like because I thought I had to. Another really great resource for understanding how to move through energy and through states of arousal. Remember I talked, like, things can either be soothing or they can be alerting, and anywhere in between. Autism Level Up uses this language. Phenomenal resource. Phenomenal. I think one of the people, so Dr. Feed is an autistic developmental psychologist, and she is in Autism Level Up. Validate communication. This is so important for me. I'm not going to talk for the rest of the day, and that's valid. I'm probably, if I'm going to talk, I'm going to use my text, or I might write something down. That's valid. Any way that you need to communicate, and you have a right to communicate in different ways. Pen and paper. If someone's trying to force you to communicate in one specific way, they're trying to control you, and they're not really concerned about your communication. Your preferences matter. You deserve access to communication, and you should have access to community, identity affirming spaces like Gawit Autism Partnership and Neuroclassic. Neuroclassic's my heart, my love, where you can find me often. But community is key, and authentic community is a treasure that should be protected. And so, yeah, here are my references. Woohoo! I went over, but I'm here. If anybody, I see, I'm going to pass it back to Aisling, and but I'm going to go through some of these comments, but if you have questions.
Great. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. I'm going to allow people to write down questions, or I'm just going to stop the recording first and foremost.
Okay.
Thanks a million.